Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, and tonight I'm going to do something that may mostly be of interest to possibly older fans or people interested in the history of fandom or the history of comic book collecting. Because what I want to do, after I get a drink, is take a close up look at the Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom. I picked this issue just kind of at random. It's number 55 from April 1st, 1974. I had to buy these rather expensively off of eBay, but they are things that I subscribed to as a kid. At least for a year, maybe 2 years, I got the the Buyer's Guide to Comic Book Fandom. And later I think did they combine with another fanzine also? But anyway, I got this for several years when I was 12, 13, maybe 14. No, probably just 12 and 13. Because when I was 14, I know we moved out of the country for a year. So I couldn't have gotten it then. And it was an ad-zine. And I didn't have money to buy all the goodies inside. Now I could. It's kind of like going on eBay or to mycomicbookshop.com and all other kinds of things the best you could in 1974. I feel like it was kind of a central zine to the comic book collecting community and those most rabid about comic art. But there were other fanzines out there like the Comic Book Reader, which I did not know about at the time. I don't know if the Comic Book Reader advertised in early 70s Marvel Comics. But anyway, I'm going to turn the camera around, take a close look at all of this, and see what we find. Ads for the Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom did not appear in early 70s comics that frequently. I had to look through 5 or 6 different early 70s issues before I found an ad. So this is definitely the ad that lured me in as a kid. Comics fans, subscribe now. A newspaper just for comic book collectors. The Comic Collector's Guide, which is odd because it's called The Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom, but I guess they changed the name, is a twice monthly newspaper featuring thousands of new and very old comic books for sale, poster-sized covers of your favorite comic book characters, articles, and more. Each issue is at least 40 newspaper-sized pages, and it's currently the world's widest read publication on this popular hobby. One entire year, 23 big issues, just $3, or the price of 15 comics. Write to Alan L. Light in Illinois. And so I subscribed. I must have sent cash because I was not able to write checks. I don't think my parents were very happy to write checks for me for things related to comic books. At least I don't think they were. That's my memory anyway. So I don't know why I picked that one. That one sounded best to me, maybe because it was newspaper size poster things. There were a few other fanzines occasionally advertised. I don't see any of them in this issue actually. But as I was flipping through, I saw other ones, but I never was tempted by any of the others. I do think I was a little disappointed when the poster-sized covers were beautiful, but it was almost all ads. There was sometimes no articles or just a few articles, a few columns. I think at some points they had some fan-created comic strips on one page, but it was, for the most part, 40 or more pages of ads. But I grew to enjoy it, and it was a window into this world that I couldn't really afford, but longed to be a part of. And perhaps that explains a lot of the way I spend money now on my comic book hobby. So inside, you always got the ad rates here, which ranged from, I think, for $38 for a full page down to $5 for an eighth size page. And you could they would shrink the ad down for you, and you could do classified ads that were $1 for a number of lines, for 6 lines, and then 15 cents each additional line. And And then every issue, now that I see it, I completely remember every issue that I got had an ad with this We Got Comics. What's the name of this? Advertise this shop. This is going to be a clumsy video. Comic Collector Shop. And it was adults only. It was all underground comics. And I wonder if that it was always, that they were always first. Maybe they paid to be first, but I wonder if it was also a statement of a hope for comics that are for adults. Because a lot of this stuff, as cheap as it seems now, a lot of this stuff was out of the reach of a kid who got like 25 cents allowance a week. And a little bit of money at birthdays and Christmas time. And when I got a bit older, maybe 14 or 15, I was also, doing extra chores at other people's houses to make some money. Little Green Dinosaur, The Man, Manhunt, this is all in alphabetical order. Mickey Rat, remember Mickey Rat? Middle Class Fantasies, Mom's Homemade, Monolith, Moondog, Mother's Oats. So I would look at all this stuff, Mr. Natural, but I would have no idea really what it was as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. I really only got to see all those kinds of magazines when I was about 18, 19, at least that I remember. Here's an interesting one to me now that probably didn't mean a lot to me at the time, but someone calling themselves Flashback was selling some kind of facsimiles of old comics for $3 a piece, which was a lot of money. I wonder if they were in black and white. Bonus issue, 50% bigger than the other Flashbacks. This classic comic is 96 pages big. Features extremely early Superman and other DC heroes at the time. 96 pages. 19th. So I wonder how this worked. I mean, these are copyrighted characters. But so for a few people out there, there were reprints. But generally, you didn't see these things reprinted. But this is interesting here. Boy, this is clumsy. I may just go handheld on you for a minute. Here, sideways, we've got Richard Corbin's Fantagora 5 is in Hot Stuff. And they explain, that's right, all of Richard Corbin's work originally planned for Fantagora 5, which will not be published, will be featured in Hot Stuff number 1. So another adults-only thing at an outrageously high price of $250, published by some sort of semi-amateurish fan publisher. So I don't know whether this would also appear in head shops, or if head shops were mostly gone by now, or not selling comics, or if it just was for sale in the few comic book shops that existed at the time, and through other fan publications. And here's one, Fandom Shop Fanzines. And it's got your old EC fanzines and that kind of stuff. I'm sorry about the shadows. Okay, this is going to be awkward. I apologize, but maybe we'll just... So here was a regular columnist. I think he might have appeared monthly. Murray Bischoff, who I looked him up. He was also a journalist in Montana, and he did a regular column. And this print is so small in these, and of course it's all typewritten with typewriters, and then shrunk down a bit. So we have stuff about Bernie Wrightson leaving the Swamp Thing, but these columns have a little bit of personality. They don't just say, oh, Bernie Wrightson is leaving the Swamp Thing. They also say, National has selected Nestor Redondo to replace Mr. Wrightson, and although he can do a credible job, this title won't be able to rise above the garbage heap, yuck yuck, any longer. Then they talk about Frank Robbins working on The Shadow, and Marvel's price hikes, and with editorializing. I can recognize the sob story when I see it. and then talk about new Kirby books like OMAC and Commandy, comic strip Little Orphan Annie. So it's almost kind of random tidbits. We uncovered a strange oddity in the comic strip world, where there's some comic strips that they can't figure out where they came from. And collectors of original and classic comic art must subscribe to Graphic Gallery, published by Russ Cochran. See his ads elsewhere in this issue. With all due respect to the Buyer's Guide, Graphic Gallery is the buyer's guide for great art, where each piece is reproduced so you can see what you're getting, and all phases of art are represented. Everything from Corvin and Wolverton to Harriman and Raymond. So yeah, this is the adult, this is the world of adult comic book collectors that I was getting a peek into. And I would say the adult comic book collectors viewed everything with kind of a sense of humor and a wink and a nod and a bit of cynicism, I guess, from judging from the columns. Oh, there's 2 columns in this issue. Comics for sale. There's going to be tons of comics for sale. What is this? Midnight Sun. Midnight Sun is a new magazine of weird heroic fantasy. Original art by John Mayer. Back cover. Conan-like stuff. So I think it's probably fiction. And then here you get all these, what are they, 1/8 size ads. Tiny, tiny print. For sale, hundreds of comics and related items. DC, Superman, Batman, action. Here's ones with actual prices. Captain Marvel #2. Is that Wiz #2 or just Captain Marvel? $19. There's Wiz 33 for $25. Those are pretty expensive comics. The Flash 62 for $9. Superboy. Okay. Well, anyway, you get kind of the picture. Here we get some of that Russ Cochran stuff. He later, I think, was the guy behind all those EC reprints that you got up through the 90s, I think. Here he's reprinting some Frazetta, Untamed Love. Personal love comics are expensive only because they contain some of the finest artwork ever done by Frank Frazetta for comics, such as the splash panel shown above. Now, 4 of these hard-to-find art treasures have been reprinted from the original artwork into a deluxe portfolio. Portfolios were a big thing. I remember seeing them all over the place. And here, I think, is an EC portfolio. Portfolios. EC portfolios 3 through 5, each one costing $15, which, again, that seemed like a huge amount of money to me. And I suppose, the average low-paid worker back then might have been getting $2 an hour or something. And here's an ad for the comic book price guide. Where does it say? Somewhere it says here. I think it's edition number 4. I can't find it. Oh, yeah. 4th edition. And the Reader's Guide. What was that? The Reader's Guide to Cthulhu Mythos. The Reader's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. So the world of pulps and the interest in pulps and things like that was much closer to the world of comic book collectors then than it is now. And the world of science fiction and fantasy prose. And certainly the artists who were the illustrators of those things. More portfolios, a King Kull portfolio by John and Marie Severin. I think I've seen those reprinted in one of the Marvel black and whites, and they were incredibly beautiful. Flesh and Fantasy portfolio by Frank Brunner. So that's another thing. Often these portfolios promised up more adult images, but you didn't see the images in the ads. Cody Starbuck from Howard Chaykin. I think that's a portfolio too. Portfolio of Insanity by Jim Starlin. I think these portfolios were usually like 5 prints or something like that combined together. We do get a little tease of the art of Jeffrey Jones there, which looks very Conan-ish. And a Conan portfolio by Barry Smith. And a Shadow portfolio by Michael W. Kaluta. So they were the more popular artists, and some of these guys kind of were probably slower artists. I don't know what the original art market was like yet, probably not too big, but there was this portfolio market for the older collectors. You could get some extra money by doing a few drawings and printing them up really nicely. I assume they were published by Middle-earth, or maybe they're just being sold by Middle-earth, this Denver, Colorado company. I think somewhere I read that they had about 2,000 to 3,000 subscribers to this ad-zine. Oh wait, is this another column? And I didn't read this one. Crusader Comments by Brackenstein. Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to have to come back and read that. And it looks like that's part of it. And then we got more ads. This is what the classified ads look like. So if you were some poor schmo and wanted to sell something and not spend more than $1 or so, you could put an ad in like this. Some handwritten, some typed on typewriters. And here's a big dealer, Ken Pierce from Winnebago Park, Forest Hills, Illinois. And you got a combination of handwritten and typed. Let's see. Let's take a closer look at some of the prices. I feel so professional here. Triple Action #1 for 75 cents. X-Men 4 through 9 for $1.50. Fantastic 441 through 45 for $1. They don't say what the condition is. Some of these kinds of ads would say the condition, but many would not. Mad Magazine. So they got a big DC section on top, Marvel's down below, Mad Magazine. Other publishers like Tower and Dell over there. What's this over here? Free Prez #1 and free Shazam. 10% discount on all orders over $35. Radio specials. I think those would be recordings of old radio shows. An ad for Houston Con 74. Over 100 dealers. Guests Kirk Allen, Alan Borbar, Fred Fredericks, Jock Mahoney, Don Newton. That's the only name here I recognize. David Sharp. Were those the rest of them actors? They would show films they would show old films that comic book nerds and fantasy pulp fiction nerds would like at these conventions. Because, of course, there were no VCRs back then. And art show. Do they have art shows anymore? Now they just have the Artist Alley, and rather than a art show. Last comic book conventions I went to still had art shows, which was fun. Oops, I flipped things around the wrong way. What am I doing? Okay. Totally confused. Comic-Con in Lemoyne, Iowa. Special offer, $5. True Market Price Guide to Comic Book Retail Values. So these are competitors, basically, of the Overstreet Guide, True Market. What have we got here? King Detective Funnies, G.I. Joe, Goofy, Happy, Haunt of Fear, Hawkman #1, $2.50. I assume that's Hawkman from the Golden Age or the Silver Age. I don't know. Jumbo, Jungle, because this is looking to me mostly like Golden Age stuff. The Flash. So there are some grading on here, some conditions listed on here. And this goes for the whole 2-page spread, so this was a serious seller. Jackson Comic Book and Film Convention. Guests Dan Adkins, Paul Galassi, Jeff Jones, Mike Kaluta, Val Myrick, Craig Russell, and Bernie Wrightston. All probably very young artists at that time. We got art auctions, guests, panels, films again. The Devil's Bride, The Big Store, Start the Revolution Without Me, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and art displays. That looks like someone's take on John Carter of Mars. Got an ad for BerkeleyCon here, which this is interesting because this is all underground stuff in the BerkeleyCon. All the guests, where did they go? Where are the guests listed? S. Clay Wilson, Roger Brand, Trina, Spain, Jackson, Irons, Dave Sheridan, Art Spiegelman, Rand Holmes, Gilbert Shelton. So that's like, other than R. Crumb, that's like a who's who of the stars that we still remember of the underground era. Fandom Spectacular, the best of the best. Fandom Spectacular 1972 is an annual best of the best publication. We say best of the best because we gathered and republished the best material from the best fanzines in Comic Fandom's 12-year history. Normally, when you order a fanzine, you get a couple of outstanding features with the rest second-rate or filler material. Not so with FS 72. We reprinted only the outstanding features from those great zines, which makes FS 72 probably one of the best fanzines of fandom today. (1941) Human Torch reprint. War Comics, Dell Comics, Western Roundup. Don't forget to list alternate choices. Another ad for the BerkeleyCon. Oh, someone selling 3 mil bags. Investors Corporation of America. Protect your comics with heavy-duty 3 mil protective polyethylene bags. Similar bags sold elsewhere at $3 per 100, $25 per 1,000. Sample on request. So bags were out there early on, but I don't even remember them at comic book shops till much later. 1974 Fantasy Calendar. This does not have a very professional look. Illustrations by Steve Harper, John Lawson, Mark Keshire, Bob Lewis, Steve Hickman, Bernie Wrightston, Jeff Jones, Dennis Fujitake, and Mike Nelly. So some of those people definitely became names, or maybe already were a little bit of a name back then. Definitely Bernie Wrightston and Jeff Jones. Phantasia Ultazine. It's hard to even read a lot of these. Above are 2 issues of Mickey Mouse Weekly, UK tabloid comic of the 30s. This looks like they're selling pulps. That might even say pulps, but it's hard to read. More very small ads mostly listing comics. Bulldog number 4. Is this a fanzine? An original Prince Valiant cover by Hal Foster. Articles by blah blah. Yeah, so that's some kind of fanzine, maybe about comic strips. Oh man, imagine reading through that to try to find the things you want to buy. Discount Comics. Batman number 4 for $80. Action Comics. Okay, this is interesting to me. I think one of my early exposures to the art of Joe Staton were these ads for his Gods of Mount Olympus graphic novels called Graphic Stories. They came with a free poster. I never ordered one, but I always would look at them, and I really wanted them. But topless women. But I loved his art style back then, and this was the first I saw of his art style. I thought, for a little while, I thought this was the greatest thing ever. I would just see that ad, or maybe some other ads with similar pictures. Vampire Mother, copyright 1974 by Jeff Jones. It's the title of a new art print. So it's an art print I'm trying to show you what a comic can be by Sanho Kim. Sanho Kim's Korea's comic book master, is now working in the U.S. The first American book completely under his creative control has been released. Sanho Kim calls it Sword's Edge. Never heard of this guy. From Iron Horse, the publisher's Iron Horse. It would cost you $1.50, including postage, if you mailed it off to an address in Michigan. Dealer Investor Specials. This is all, remember, this is 1973. A lot of early Avengers for $1.25. Captain America 117 and a bunch of others for $1.25. By Captain Marvel, I assume that's Marvel's Captain Marvel. Conan, number 38, 10 copies for $2.50. Is that? Okay. Yeah, so they're selling things in large bundles of copies for the most part. Atlas, I assume this means the Golden Age. Atlas Comics, miscellaneous Golden Age, Timely, Marvel Mystery. So there's some grades on there. Whoops, sorry about that. And this is really interesting to me. An apology. The Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom wishes to take this space to apologize to Mr. Roy Thomas for the full-page advertisement we published in the January 1st issue from Joe Brancatelli. Joe Brancatelli? I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, but I am familiar with that name. Calling Mr. Thomas a liar. The Buyer's Guide certainly does not feel Roy Thomas is a liar. In fact, we feel he is well deserving of the goodwill and admiration of every fan of comics. As publishers of what we hope is a quality publication, we should have rejected this potentially libelous ad, which was in poor taste. Our deepest apologies to Mr. Thomas for that advertisement and any harm it has caused. I really want to know what that advertisement was, and I searched online. I remember Joe, however you pronounce his name, Joe Brancatelli, as a columnist in a number of magazines, most notably Warren magazines, where he ripped to shreds all the hypocrisies of the business of comics. And that was very interesting, especially since it was in Warren magazines, which I don't know if they treated their creators that well. But he was kind of a muckraker, and he loved to, I think put everything in kind of an extremely negative light. So what he was doing attacking Roy Thomas and what it was about, I would love to know. But I couldn't, with a quick search on the web, I couldn't find it. And he founded an early comics news and opinion magazine that probably was an influence on things like Comics Journal. I'm trying to remember what the name of that magazine was. I'll get back to that. I'll look into that some more. Wiz number 1 for sale. They go into a lot of detail, and it's a bidding situation. The minimum bid is $2,000. I wonder if Wiz, it's not really number 1, is it? Or is this the ash can? Four copies of Wiz number 1, not including the above copy. So I guess it is maybe the ash can that was just sent to... they're also looking to trade for comics. So kind of almost what some people are now doing on YouTube, where they do auctions and trades with each other. They had to do it through this newspaper. We got the new Neal Adams Index. We've got something called the Fandom Annual number 3, 200 pages for $4. And another price guide competing with the Overstreet, the SFCA price guide, whatever that stands for. It's IBM typed with improved bindings, artist checklists, full page cover reproductions, mail frauds, comic inventory. And here we have an ad for Conan. On one side, it's all the Conan Lancer books, which were considered very collectible at the time with the popularity of Frank Frazetta. This would be before there was many reproductions of Frank Frazetta paintings around. Later, everyone had a poster on their wall. In fact, I had this picture as a poster on my wall as a teenager. And then issues of Conan. So things that I'm fascinated by that seem kind of weird now to maybe younger readers were just what every comics collector was fascinated in at the time. I mean, you had to pay a whole $1 for Conan #7 in good condition, and $1.50 to get it in very good to fine condition. So, expensive comic book. Endless ads for back issues. And then this from really well-known fans now anyway, and I think maybe back then they were pretty well-known. Bill and Maggie Thompson did this article called Beautiful Balloons, which was monthly, and it was gigantic because if you look at these, maybe each quarter of the page is really a typed page that's been shrunk down. And they had, each one is the equivalent of 4 type pages, and they had 3 pages, so that's 12 type pages of a column. So it's really a gigantic column, and it covered just about anything. It had clippings that they found, that people sent them from their local newspaper that might have covered something involving comics. There is one thing that was kind of funny, was talking about restoration of comics. We are compiling a handbook for fans, and one of the areas we want to cover is how to improve a damaged but choice comic book or pulp magazine or book or strip of that for that matter. The handbook is being serialized in first draft form in the Menominee Falls Gazette and will eventually be published by Street Enterprises. Those are the people who eventually owned the, what's it called? I just showed it at the beginning of the video and I can't remember. It's getting late at night. However, it seems to us that this particular area is one which might draw a greater and more fruitful response from the audience of the Buyer's Guide, which is almost by definition composed of collectors of comic art. What we have in mind for example, are tricks like these two. Scotch tape should never be applied to comic books. However, years ago, the pernicious stuff was touted as the perfect method for repairing torn books and papers, and lots of people patched comic books and magazines with it in the 40s. We've seen many cases where the stuff was used to completely coat the covers of mint pulp magazines in the mistaken belief that it would preserve and protect the cover. Naturally, it instead turned yellow and permanently stained the cover it was supposed to protect. And then they go on to mention, when you have a comic with a rolled spine, disassemble the comic carefully, open it to the center, and bend up the staple ends with a nail file or knife, and ease out the staples, and iron each page smooth, and then, still using the iron, fold the page properly, and iron the crease in where it belongs. Then, put the book back together and restaple it. For this, you need a long stapler, which costs around $12. We got ours for much less at a used office supply store. But it can repair hundreds of dollars in comics. Other suggestions? It's a potpourri of all kinds of different comic talk. There's a discussion of comic book artists swiping, which I guess jumps out from some time where they were commenting on Simon and Kirby swiping from Hal Foster. That's interesting. And they defend their position of being against it. And there's talk about the upcoming Doc Savage movie. There's talk about how the wife of David Bowie did not get the role for the Wonder Woman show, which eventually went to Kathy Lee Crosby, and we know that show never took off. They talk about the Spirit black and white reprints that people had been selling Spirit section reprints in black and white, and then how just recently the Spirit magazine from Warren just came out, and how much they like that. Although, interesting, because my complaints about coloring are like this now. We've only two small complaints. The color tends to be applied too heavily, obscuring detail, and the color comics do not carry the date of the original appearance of the story. Now, those Warren reprints were mostly black and white. They just had one color version in the middle on some slick paper. But even back then, people were complaining. So here's a cartoon about the Phantom, the ghost who walks, and he has a Ian Smith fan club. I'm not sure what that means. And behind him are natives protesting. Fight white blight, pygmy power, honky go home, pygmy power. Them boots were made for walking, boy. And I can't quite tell if is that, whose signature is that? It's not Stanton. At first I thought it was Joe Stanton, but it doesn't look like his art anyway. And here, is this the Spectre or is this someone else? I returneth again. So there you go, another ad for Protective Bags. So, whoops. I think I looked at these ads for Protective Bags every other week in every issue from Robert Bell, and never thought to buy any, never thought what it implied for how to take good care of your comics. And it would come mailed to you just like this. I don't think it was stapled even. I'm not sure. I hope, well, this person has probably long since left that area. What are these? Other reprint books. Do you have these books? So the world of fandom was a tiny one then, but it's resembles our world a lot on YouTube. Although everything was about artists, not about key issues, and not a little bit about number ones. But other than that, it was all about artists. And of course, there was no slabbing. You probably, when you ordered comics, for most of these people, the comics would not come in bags and boards. So anyway, I hope a few of you found this interesting. I know it's for a limited audience, indeed, and a sloppily made video. But I may try and do some more stuff with this, like maybe read excerpts from more of these columns, maybe get some background art while I read them or something, if anyone would be interested in that. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.